This video is brought to you by Knowledge at the Australian School of Business.
It's often said that tax shouldn't be taxing. But for many businesses, trying to work out what tax they should be paying is a very complex issue, as is trying to reduce their tax bill. With that comes risk, the risk of either paying too much tax or alternatively the danger of paying too little, which might get them into legally hot water. The 10th ATAX International Tax Administration Conference, hosted by the Australian School of Business, has this year focused on the business of identification and management of risk faced by tax administrators and their advisors. Michael D'Ascenzo, the Commissioner for Taxation Australia, gave the keynote speech. Now, if you'll forgive the pun, why has, if you like, a wolf walked into the sheep's lair and the taxman's obviously cometh, but why have you come along to the ATAX conference?
Look, I've been a supporter of the ATAX conference since the inception of the ATAX conference. Started off actually as an ATO initiative with ATAX associated with trying to understand compliance costs for taxpayers. I was chaired its advisory board for about 6 years, so I'm a supporter of ATAX or the research and study of tax and how we can improve that for the benefit of the country.
Now, in your keynote address, you were talking a lot about transparency. Why is it important for your average common or garden, if you like, taxpayer, the person who just works, pays a bit of tax, and that's it?
Well, I think tax is about building trust and community confidence. And we can play traditional games of hide and seek after the event, or taxpayers who just don't understand or don't understand their rights and obligations, get it wrong. So the earlier you can do it, the better it is. So for ordinary taxpayers, we're there to try to help them understand what their rights and obligations are. They get that information and they don't make a mistake. So it's really very much a prevention rather than cure approach. We really want to prevent people from making mistakes, getting into trouble, or doing things that just are wrong. And so anything that we can do up front with a degree of transparency, the better. I also think that if you want to build trust and confidence in the community, you can't hide your cards. You have to put it on the table. And so being an open, accountable administration helps people build that trust and confidence in you.
And yet, you said just there, the cost of compliance, and for many people it is a costly process of going along once a year, filling in that tax return. Would you actually like to see us move towards a more sort of pay tax as you earn system, as many other countries have moved towards, and just scrapping the annual tax return?
Yeah, well, we've got pay as you earn as it is in Australia for normal wage and salary earners. It's a really reconciliation at the end of the day, which happens in any other country as well. And one of the beauties in terms of the Australian system is that about 80% of returns are filed for a refund. And our research actually says that people don't mind that, provided that process of filing the return is not too hard. And so what we've been trying to do is to have pre-filling, either our e-tax application, making things easy as possible for tax agents, BAS agents, so that they can fill their returns in quickly, easily, without too much stress, and then the reconciliation's done in a proper way after that. What happens in some other countries where they have the pay-as-you-go system is that there is a hidden cost, and the cost is often on the business or the employer who has to do a lot of this reconciliation work, and it's actually questionable whether or not that's a fair system for the employer, whereas in the Australian system, yes, the taxpayer has to file a return, but our role is to try to make it as simple as we can for them.
Only 2.5 million people use data matching to pre-fill their tax forms for their e-tax form and then fill it out themselves. Why don't more people do it?
Well, I mean, we've had a tradition of taxpayers going to tax agents. We have a high incidence of that, and indeed when they go to tax agents now, something like 9 million returns were pre-filled by the ATO through their tax agents, and then another 2.5 million were pre-filled through our e-tax facility. So you're getting to, 11, 12 million out of about a 13 million individual population. So very high level of pre-filled information being used. Sometimes people go for the tax agents for a lot of reasons. One is that in the Australian community you've got people that have a range of other requirements that make it more difficult for them. They might own shares, they might have capital gains tax issues, they may have property development or property investments. It does become more complicated. They're running quasi sort of business activities. For individual wage and salary earners, their option is to use e-tax, or if they get a good cheap service from a tax agent, they do that. It saves them having to focus on something once a year for the weekend, and they can do it very quickly.
Certainly I remember it was quite controversial when it was introduced, data matching, taking details of people's bank accounts and sending them straight to the ATO. Has the controversy around that really died down?
I was giving a talk just before Christmas in, I think, 2007 when it was introduced, and a tax agent was haranguing me and made the whole period most uncomfortable for me. And I said, look, it's optional, it's there to help. And if it helps you, well, that's good. And it was all this sort of issue, but Big Brother and all sorts of stuff. Look, the reality is that anyone that is trying to do their work in an efficient sort of way will make use of it. Because what tax agents often found was that the taxpayer would go there, they'd forget matters, they'd have to be prompted, you'd take more than one meeting, costs go up, both for the taxpayer and for them. Or if there's a mistake and something's excluded and they're picked up on interest and dividend checks, the tax agent found that all this was an unnecessary effort. So what we have now, something like 9 million returns, thereabouts, being pre-filled by the tax agent. In fact, before the client comes in, the tax agent often has their returns pre-filled, and they say to the client, does this cover your position? And if it does, it's so much simpler than it was in the past.
And yet, if people don't actually go for this pre-filling process, if they do it manually, do you assume then that they're a little bit of a higher risk, that they're not being quite so transparent, they're not just bringing on all the data, and therefore they may be trying to hide something?
Well, we still have, I think, something like a bit over 500,000 that lodge paper returns that don't have a pre-filling facility. So there's some of that nature. So basically, anyone that uses electronic means has gone to pre-filling now.
Okay, well, let's move on then to the process of tax collection. Have you actually got enough resources to collect all the tax that's due? After all, I've seen some figures saying that there's an extra 10% of tax that's out there that could be collected if you had the manpower, if you like, to go out and get it.
As a commissioner, my role is to be as efficient and effective in the usage of the resources that I have. And that's why I'm really keen to push new thinking, innovative ways of approaching tax administration and super administration, and to make sure that those new ways of doing it achieve the right sort of effectiveness and outcomes rather than just doing the same thing as we've done in the past. I think if there's more work to be done, then I should be looking at better ways of trying to achieve that, as well as hoping for more funding over time.
But if we're talking about efficiency, I've got to ask you about Wickenby. And in terms of the actual revenue that it's generating, when you compare it with the amount of effort that's going into collecting that revenue, is it worthwhile?
Oh, it's been a great success. I mean, when we went to government in terms of the return on investment, we've beaten that by a long way. So the intent always of Wickenby was that deterrence effect, trying to make sure that people in Australia didn't try to avoid or evade tax using tax secrecy jurisdictions. And what we're seeing now with some of the data we have from AUSTRAC is that we've got significant reductions of flow of funds from Australia to some of these typical tax secrecy jurisdictions, and we're seeing some repatriation of funds back into Australia that way. The anecdotal information is that advisors and others no longer hear people saying, "Oh, can you put me into this offshore scheme?" Nor are they prepared to countenance them, because they know there's a real risk. A third element is the degree of cooperation and the template for whole of government approaches to fighting, whether it be organised crime or abuses of the tax or super systems.
So does aggressive but perfectly legal tax planning, if people are being quite careful and they've gone along to tax advisors and checked out that their position is legal, Does that still annoy you that people are still trying to find new and inventive ways of avoiding?
This comes back to my proposition about transparency. And so if people legitimately want to apply the law, they can be transparent about it.
Okay, well in that case let's go full circle and finally end up by saying quite unusually the Australian Taxation Office can actually have its judgments go to tribunal, or even if you really want to you can go to court and actually question them. This is quite unusual in the global sphere where for many people the tax office is judge and jury. That again must be an extra bit of hassle for you.
No, that's not hassle. That's a feature of the Australian system. We operate on what we call a rule of law system. And what we operate on the basis that we're not going to be arbitrary, we're not going to be capricious, and we're not going to operate on administrative fiat. And so we actually want taxpayers to have their rights protected, and that's why we've got the AAT, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and we've got the courts. And as well as that, there's a whole range of other mechanisms, the judicial mechanisms, there's the Ombudsman, there's a whole range of checks and balances. We think that's a good system to provide the right sort of balance between the tax administration and the citizen.
And I'm sure it's a balance that many tax professionals will hope that you can achieve in the future. Michael, it's been good talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more business news and analysis from Knowledge at the Australian School of Business, please visit knowledge.asb.unsw.edu.au.